They didn't use a blade to end his life. They didn't hang him from a tree or cast him from a cliff. In the city of Sparta, where the law was as hard as the iron they used for swords, they chose a punishment that was far more intimate and far more terrifying. They turned a place of worship into a tomb. The man inside was not a common criminal. He was the savior of Greece, the hand that had broken the back of the Persian Empire at the Battle of Plataea. Yet, as the sun dipped below the horizon of the Eurotas Valley, the only sound he could hear was the scraping of stone against stone. The men outside, his friends, his soldiers, his peers, were systematically erasing him from the world. And then came the final blow, the one that history remembers in a whisper. His own mother, a woman of Spartan blood and iron will, walked to the entrance. She didn't scream. She didn't weep. She simply picked up a heavy block of limestone, set it firmly into the gap, and turned her back on her son forever. To understand how the most powerful man in the Greek world ended up starving in the dark of a bronze temple, we have to look past the gold of his medals and into the shadow of his ambition. This is not just a story of treason. It is a story about the terrifying distance between a hero and a ghost. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. In the year 479 BC, the world felt as though it were made of fire and bronze. The Persian Empire, a machine of conquest that stretched from the borders of India to the shores of the Hellespont, had poured its fury into the small, rocky valleys of Greece. They came with hundreds of thousands of men, a tide of humanity intended to drown the very idea of freedom. And against them stood a fractured, bickering coalition of Greek city-states. At the center of this chaos stood Pausanias. He was a man defined by what he was not. He was not the king of Sparta. He was the regent, a placeholder for the young son of the fallen hero Leonidas. Every time Pausanias looked into a mirror, he saw a man standing in the shadow of a legend. He carried the weight of Thermopylae on his shoulders, knowing that the world expected him to die just as grandly as Leonidas had. But Pausanias didn't want to be a martyr. He wanted to be a victor. At the Battle of Plataea, he proved his genius. While others panicked, he waited. While the Persians rained arrows upon his lines, he stood still, refusing to move until the gods gave him a sign. It was a display of iron discipline that only a Spartan could achieve. When he finally gave the order to charge, the Persian line didn't just break, it vanished. By sunset, the invasion was over. Pausanias had done what no one thought possible. He had united the Greeks and defeated the greatest empire on earth. But victory is a dangerous drug. For a man who was only a regent, the taste of absolute power changed the chemistry of his soul. As the Greek fleet sailed across the Aegean to clean up the remaining Persian garrisons, Pausanias began to move differently. He began to speak differently. He had saved the Greek world, and in his mind, the Greek world now owed him everything. He wasn't just a soldier anymore, he was a titan. And in Sparta, a city that hated nothing more than an individual who thought he was greater than the state, the eyes of the elders began to narrow. They had watched him defeat the Persians, but now they were beginning to wonder if he had brought a piece of the Persian darkness back home with him. The first cracks in his reputation didn't appear on the battlefield. They appeared in the banquet halls. Reports began to filter back to the Spartan authorities. Pausanias was dressing in flowing Persian silks. He was surrounding himself with a foreign bodyguard. He was acting less like a humble Spartan commander and more like a great king. To the Spartans, this wasn't just a change in fashion, it was a symptom of a rotting mind. They knew that before a man betrays his country, he first betrays his culture. In the rigid, sun-bleached streets of Sparta, power did not look like gold. It looked like a plain red cloak and a bowl of black broth. The Spartans believed that luxury was a poison that softened the soul, and they watched their regents with the intensity of hawks. So, when the news arrived from the city of Byzantium, the strategic gateway between Europe and Asia, that Pausanias was living like a Persian satrap, it wasn't just a scandal. It was a declaration of war against the Spartan way of life. Pausanias had captured Byzantium with the efficiency of a predator. The city was a prize, controlling the grain routes that fed half of Greece. But instead of securing it for the alliance, he began to treat it as his private kingdom. He traded his heavy bronze breastplate for flowing purple robes. He stopped eating with his soldiers and started hosting elaborate banquets where the wine flowed according to Persian custom, not Spartan restraint. To the Ionian Greeks serving under him, men who had just spent years fighting to escape Persian tyranny, Pausanias started to look exactly like the monster they had just defeated. But the most damning report didn't involve his clothes or his food. It involved the prisoners. During the fall of Byzantium, Pausanias had captured several high-ranking Persian nobles, including relatives of King Xerxes himself. These men were the ultimate bargaining chips, worth mountains of gold in ransom or decades of peace and diplomacy. And then, one night, they simply vanished. Pausanias claimed they had escaped. He blamed the guards. He blamed the chaos of the city. But the rumors in the marketplace told a different story. They whispered that Pausanias hadn't lost the prisoners. He had gifted them back to the great king. It was a silent message sent across the sea. I am a man you can do business with. In Sparta, the ephors, the 5 overseers who held the power to judge even kings, sat in the shadows and listened. They didn't have a signed confession. They didn't have a witness who had seen the gold change hands. But they knew the mathematics of treason. A Spartan who acts like a Persian usually ends up serving one. They knew that if they moved too quickly, they might spark a civil war. Pausanias was still the hero of Plataea, and he had a fleet loyal to him. They decided to test him. They didn't send an army to arrest him. They didn't send a list of charges. They sent a skytail, a wooden staff used to send encrypted messages. Wrapped around the staff was a single strip of leather with a message that was terrifying in its simplicity. Come home at once, or be declared an enemy of the state. It was a gamble. If Pausanias was truly a traitor with a Persian army at his back, he would stay in Byzantium and defy them. But Pausanias, perhaps blinded by his own arrogance or perhaps believing that his legendary status made him untouchable, did the one thing no one expected. He boarded a ship and sailed back to the city that was already building his cage. He walked into the valley of the Helots not as a prisoner, but as a man who believed he could outtalk the law. He didn't realize that in Sparta, once the elders stopped talking, they start building walls. When Pausanias stepped back onto Spartan soil, he didn't come as a penitent. He came with the stride of a man who believed the ground should tremble beneath his feet. He was the regent of the Aegean house, the man who had looked Xerxes' generals in the eye and didn't blink. In his mind, the ephors were merely bureaucrats, men who managed the accounting of a city while he managed the destiny of a civilization. But in Sparta, arrogance is a scent that the law can smell from miles away. The ephors put him on trial almost immediately. The charges were serious but slippery: Persianizing, adopting the customs of the enemy, and the suspicious release of the Byzantine prisoners. Yet, Pausanias was a master of the spoken word. He argued that his Persian behavior was a tactical mask, a way to infiltrate the minds of the enemy. He claimed the prisoners had escaped due to the incompetence of subordinates, not his own design. Without a smoking gun, the Spartan court hesitated. They stripped him of his official command and his fleet, but they could not find enough evidence to execute a member of the royal family. They released him, hoping he would fade into the background. They didn't realize that a man like Pausanias does not know how to be small. Cast out from the halls of power, Pausanias did something that turned the blood of every Spartan citizen cold. He began to look toward the Helots. To understand the weight of this, you have to understand that Sparta was a city built on a knife's edge. For every one Spartan citizen, there were 7, perhaps 10, Helots, the enslaved population that worked the fields and provided the labor that kept the military machine running. The Spartans lived in a state of permanent, low-grade terror that the Helots would one day rise up and slit their throats in their sleep. The rumor began as a whisper in the slave quarters and ended as a roar in the council chambers. Pausanias was promising the Helots their freedom. He was allegedly offering them the rights of citizens if they would support him in a coup to overthrow the ephors and seize absolute power. If this was true, it wasn't just treason, it was an existential threat. It was the burning of the foundations of Sparta itself. The ephors watched him night and day. They saw him meeting with shadowy figures on the outskirts of the city. They saw the way the Helots looked at him, not with the usual downcast eyes of the oppressed, but with a glimmer of hope that looked like fire. But still, they waited. In Sparta, you do not kill a prince on a rumor. You kill him on proof. They needed a message, a letter, a voice that could not be denied. They needed Pausanias to hang himself with his own words. They were about to get exactly what they wanted, delivered by a man who had realized he was carrying his own death warrant in his pocket. Every empire is built on secrets, and in the ancient world, secrets traveled in the pockets of men who were never meant to be remembered. Pausanias had a system. He didn't use official Spartan messengers. He used a private circle of servants, men who ate his bread and slept in his shadow. They were his ghosts, carrying letters across the Aegean to the Persian satrap Artabazus. These letters weren't just correspondence, they were a blueprint for the betrayal of Greece. But there was a pattern to these deliveries that one particular messenger began to notice. It was a cold, mathematical realization. Of all the men Pausanias had sent into Persian territory over the last year, not a single one had ever returned. They didn't come back with gold. They didn't come back with replies. They simply ceased to exist. The messenger, a man whose name has been lost to time but whose fear remains etched in history, stood on the outskirts of Sparta, holding a sealed scroll. He looked at the wax seal of the regent and felt the weight of a coffin. He knew that if he crossed the border, he was a dead man. So, he did the unthinkable. He broke the seal. He peeled back the wax and read the words that Pausanias had written to the Persian court. The letter was a masterpiece of ego. Pausanias offered to deliver the Peloponnese into the hands of Xerxes. He requested a marriage to the king's daughter, envisioning himself as a royal governor of a Greek province. But it was the final line that stopped the messenger's heart. Once this message is delivered, kill the bearer immediately. The messenger didn't run to Persia. He ran to the ephors. When the 5 elders of Sparta read the letter, they finally had the smoking gun. But Pausanias was a hero of the state. If they arrested him based on a letter that he could claim was a forgery by a disgruntled servant, they risked a public uprising. They needed him to confess. They needed his own voice to convict him. They orchestrated a trap of cinematic precision. They instructed the messenger to flee to the Temple of Poseidon at Cape Taenarum and claim sanctuary as a suppliant, pretending he was terrified of Pausanias' wrath. Then, they built a double-walled hut. The messenger sat in the front, and the ephors hid in the back, pressed against the thin partition, holding their breath in the dark. Pausanias, hearing that his messenger had fled to a temple, rushed to the site. He entered the hut, frantic and demanding to know why the letter hadn't been delivered. The messenger, playing his part with the desperation of a man fighting for his life, wept. He asked why his master had ordered his death after years of loyal service. And there, in the silence of the sacred grove, Pausanias spoke. He didn't deny the letter. He didn't apologize for the death warrant. Instead, he tried to comfort the man. He promised him safety if he would just finish the task. He spoke openly of his negotiations with the Persians, of his plans for the Helots, and of the new world he was going to build. Behind the wall, the ephors listened. Every word was a nail in his coffin. They had heard enough. The savior of Greece was no longer a man. He was a cancer that had to be cut out. The air inside the Temple of Athena was growing thin. The smell of incense and old wood was being replaced by the dry, metallic scent of limestone dust. Pausanias stood in the center of the sanctum, watching the light from the doorway shrink as the wall rose. He was a man who had commanded thousands, a man who had moved the borders of empires with a single word. Now, he was a prisoner of four walls and a roof. Then, the work outside paused. A path cleared through the soldiers and the masons. An elderly woman approached the rising wall. She did not wear the jewelry of a royal house or the silks of a queen. She wore the plain, coarse wool of a Spartan mother. It was Alcithea. Pausanias may have expected a plea. He may have expected her to throw herself at the feet of the ephors, begging for the life of her son, the savior of Greece. But Alcithea was a daughter of Sparta before she was a mother. She looked at the half-finished wall, and then she looked into the darkness where her son stood. She didn't say a word. She reached down, her aged hands gripping a heavy, jagged stone. With a strength born of cold conviction, she lifted it and placed it firmly into the center of the doorway. She was not just sealing a building, she was disowning a traitor. When she turned and walked away, the rest of the city followed her lead. The hesitation vanished. If his own blood had judged him, the gods would surely approve. The final stones were hammered into place, and the bronze doors were vanished behind a face of gray rock. Days passed. At first, there were sounds, muffled shouting, the frantic clawing of fingernails against stone, the pacing of a man who realized that all his brilliance had led him to a hole in the ground. Then, the shouting turned to pleas. Then, the pleas turned to a low, rhythmic moaning. And finally, there was only the wind whistling through the cracks in the roof tiles. The ephors didn't want him to die inside the temple. That would be a true sacrilege, a corpse rotting on holy ground. They waited until the silence was absolute. When they finally broke a hole in the wall, they found him. He was a shadow of the man who had stood at Plataea. His skin was pulled tight over his bones, his eyes sunken and unfocused. They dragged him out into the blinding Spartan sun, and as the first breath of fresh air hit his lungs, his heart gave up. He died on the threshold, a man caught between the world of the living and the house of the dead. But the story didn't end with his breath. Almost immediately, Sparta began to feel the weight of what they had done. Crops failed. Tremors shook the earth. The oracle at Delphi sent a chilling message. The goddess was angry. To atone for the pollution of Pausanias' death, the city was forced to cast 2 bronze statues of the man they had just killed and place them inside the temple. It was the ultimate irony. The state that had walled him in was now forced to worship his image. Pausanias had wanted to be a monument, and in death, he became one. But the damage was done. The trust of the Greek allies was shattered, and the rise of Athens began in the vacuum he left behind. The distance between a hero and a traitor had been closed by a single wall of stone, and Sparta would spend the next century paying the price for the silence of the Bronze House. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.